My guest today brings a rather unique perspective and an interesting story to the conversation of consciousness. Eileen Hall is an artist and consciousness explorer who is also the founder of TIOS, an organization supporting the protection of endangered habitats in Ecuador. As an artist, she explores our relationship to nature, its role in our well-being through art, music, and science. Eileen, welcome to the conversation.
Hi, Mark. It's great to be here.
It's nice to have you. We share a lot in common. You and I have a high regard for art, science, and consciousness exploration, so I think we're going to have a lot to unpack with the audience in that regard. But before we do, I really want to begin this conversation with TIOS. There's quite a story there. You're the daughter of what I consider to be a real-life Indiana Jones type, an archaeological treasure hunter and explorer. Tell the listeners the history of the TIOS caves and why your father was so fascinated with them.
So my father, Stanley Hall, was a Scottish civil engineer who, from a very young age, was very interested in the missing history of our planet. Also, he was very interested in figuring out why we're so violent and self-destructive. And that began with his kind of inquiry into the Nazis. He grew up as a child in the Second World War, so he got very interested in how so much evil could exist in this world. Right. And as he started following the Nazi trail, he discovered that actually they were into all sorts of esoteric treasure hunts. They were looking for, the Ark of the Covenant, and we know that story. And so in that, he started uncovering more hidden history. And over a period of time, it was always his side thing. He started turning his eye towards South America, the Americas, as this missing piece in history. And so when in 1972, Eric von Daniken published his book, Gold of the Gods, or Chariots of the Gods, right. Within it, I think it's the first chapter, he talks about this cave in the Ecuadorian jungle in which there's supposed to be this large treasure. So chamber after chamber filled with artifacts, jewelry, statues, and especially this golden library, these metallic books that had these Sumerian-looking inscriptions, stuff that was alien to this continent. And further than that, a crystal library. And so this book kind of exploded into the scene back then, especially it was just after we landed on the moon. Right. And so my father, already researching other types of treasures, such as El Dorado and all these different explorers that had throughout the ages got lost in jungles looking for such things. My father basically figured that if this was true, then someone had to go and find this out. It was quite an extraordinary claim. And so he ended up getting the support of the British and Ecuadorian governments to put together what's still today the largest scientific cave expedition of all time. My father, being an engineer, really just wanted to create a scientific framework from which to study this story, this legend, and also open up more of the South American missing history pieces. So my father ends up getting the top universities, cavers at the time, and also invited Neil Armstrong to come as honorary president. This happened in 1976. And so they descended down into the southeastern jungles of Ecuador, which is in the border with Peru, and spent a month mapping this place inside out. It was about 5 kilometers of cave systems that they mapped. At the time, not many people knew these cave systems, these large tunnels and chambers under the Andes and the Amazon even existed. I mean, people knew of caves, but the extent to which these were mapped started showing this larger picture. The scientists also found 400 new species of flora and fauna for science. They tested a new rabies vaccine. But unfortunately, no treasure was found. They did find the remains of a person with some artifacts which dated to 3,500 years ago. And that was kind of taken back to the university in Quito. Turns out that Eric von Daniken was not telling the truth. We now know he exaggerated a lot of his research, let's say, or his stories in his in his work. And that started my father. But by then, my father was so interested in these types of treasure stories and so many other accounts that he became convinced that there was something to be found in the bowels of the earth in this way. So that's when he decided to just follow that trail, stay in Ecuador. That's how he met my mom. And ended up actually starting a project to protect this area of Ecuador and also parts of Peru as a World Heritage Site through UNESCO. He got so far as in getting money and funding, but the governments just said we're more interested in the gold. Well, they didn't actually say that, but we now know there's a lot of gold in that area. And so actually trying to protect these places was very difficult back then. And in that same place, my father was also, in terms of ancient history, just looking to see whether there was these more advanced civilizations in the Americas back then. And we're starting to see that there's all these sites being discovered. There's a pyramid in Peru that's 10,000 years old. And the scientists I work with are starting to find all sorts of interesting remains in other caves. And so my father is, like I said, kind of was the catalyst for all this other research. He managed to convince this one geologist, Theo Tulcarides, to map caves in Ecuador. And again, that wasn't done until really my father came along. And yes, so he then went from being this engineer, project manager in Scotland to then dedicating the rest of his life to trying to solve this mystery and really pointing people towards South America as the missing piece that we need to keep looking at. And yeah, another thing that I'll mention quickly was something else that drew me to his work was this idea that we keep self-sabotaging because of the violence and trauma we've been through as a species over the last few thousand years. And he was particularly interested in the time period when the major religions sprouted. So Christianity, Islam, and some previous tales of gods that we see appearing in our mythologies. Like, where did that come from? And what was going on that our consciousness, our psyche needed these things to appear in order to navigate the world. So yeah, between those two things, I ended up then taking over his work when he died in 2008.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So he went there looking for the mythological golden writings, which proved to be a farce, but then he found your mom, which was the real treasure. This is what you're telling me, right? In addition to exploring caves, that was a massive undertaking. And quite something for an engineer, a Scottish engineer, to work with two different governments, gathering all these scientists and military folks. Why was the military involved in that, first of all? I'm very curious about that. Do you know?
Yeah, well, back then, my father started putting together the expedition with one of his friends that was in the military back in Scotland. My dad did some time in the RAF. And he just knew the moment you got special forces involved, you got the job done. So
it was efficiency.
It was efficiency. So the special forces were able to get all the permits and all the support. And everyone loved the idea of going into the jungle to look for this treasure, right? It also caught everyone's imagination so beautifully. And also at the same time, it was a dictatorship that was in place in Ecuador. So it was a military government that was in charge. And my father actually says that if it hadn't been for a military government, he's not sure he would have pulled that off. Because it did an expedition of that size, which again hasn't been done since then. Like, that was the largest and it continues to be the biggest. It should have taken 4 years of organization. My dad did it in a year and a half.
Nice.
And so it was like pushing a camel through the eye of a needle, as he says himself. But my father was one of the top project managers in the country at the time. He was leading, multi-million dollar projects of infrastructure and building works. So he got very good at bringing people together to make something happen. That was his background as an engineer. And so he just applied that same kind of mentality into something like this. Is like, we have a mystery, we have this legend, we have something that's quite ambiguous in a sense.
Right.
How do we bring this structure and scientific framework to begin to further that exploration?
That was no small undertaking. Just getting to the jungles and then getting into the caves and then mapping the caves. I mean, the organizational and logistical structure of something like that is monumental. I can't even imagine what he went through. It must have required a great deal of motivation on his part in order to do that. And now I'm intensely curious as to what would motivate somebody to dedicate that kind of time and resources and energy. I mean, I'm just as interested in mythological writings and ancient aliens as anybody else. And I'm also very curious about things like, why human beings act in the way they do. But I'm not sure that I could do what he did. That's just an amazing story.
He didn't know Ecuador was such an amazing place.
Right.
Like, he also refers to Ecuador as a treasure. It's one of the most biodiverse regions in the planet, and geologically interesting, and culturally, so many different types of tribes and customs are found there. So, yeah, my father was very much led by his intention to bring peace to life. Like, my father was one of the most peaceful, calm, loving, generous, kind people I've ever met. So from a young age, because he had this kind of light, he had just this light in him. When he saw this violence on TV and through the war, it was that contrast. He wanted to understand how there could be so much destruction in a world that's so beautiful, which is what he sensed in the world, was this beauty. And he was so open, and I do think he was very much of the mystical space. My father was definitely in those, kind of swimming in those realms before he knew what they were. And so he had this very strong conviction to get to the truth, really get to the bottom of why it is that we've been either lied to. Why was history written in the way it was? Why do we keep self-sabotaging? And like I said, where does this violent streak come from? And so he just kept going. I think he met, when he was 13 in this time Dunbar that he lived in, he met someone that had been in battle with Lawrence of Arabia. I think two generals, two different people that had been, and so Dad was captivated by these stories of these explorers as well. So I think it was, his intention to bring people more peace and understanding and wisdom and resolution, but also he loved adventure. My father was someone that was very adventurous. And so I think, coupled with his passionate nature, off he went. And I mean, I'll mention this because it is a consciousness podcast, but in his 20s, when he was 26, he also had a mystical experience with the light that engulfed him. He was studying religious texts at the time, because it seemed that this, any religion seems to justify war back in the day. We're killing for the name of God a lot. So he was like, what's this God thing about? But, he ended up having this light engulf him just out of nowhere and show him infinity and ultimate love, and was just so, again, this moment of absolute peace and knowing and trust in his journey. I think, again, my father was so clear in himself. Again, he just, and he meant what he said. He always followed his word with action, and he just trusted himself massively. So I didn't know, I didn't know all this until after he died. My dad was also very private. He didn't, just share lots of things. He just wanted to get to the bottom of his research.
I see. So you learned a lot about your dad during the course of this, or afterwards, I'm assuming, huh?
Yeah, afterwards, I would say I learned a lot about my dad, his spirit, and his nature as a human being his daughter. He died when I was 22, and he was trying to protect us from danger. I mean, treasure hunters. I mean, that whole thing. I mean, treasure hunting is not the safest thing to do. And so he made a conscious effort not to get us too involved in case that would put us in danger in some way.
I see.
So I didn't know all the details until after he died.
Right. Well, that set you off on a journey, didn't it? Your own journey, I mean. And I really want to get into that journey because I've seen your artwork, and I think it's quite reflective in many ways of the tale that we're exploring here. But before we do, I really want to put a button on this portion. They didn't manage to find what they were looking for necessarily, but they did manage to map out the caves and gather some data on the wildlife that was there. But it was such a massive undertaking, and your dad actually manages to get Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon, to join this expedition. How did that come about? Do you know?
Well, yeah, I like I said, I think by then, because there had been so many pieces of different types of evidence fitting into place for my dad, where he was like, he said, we're going to South America. And secondly, the moment I think the special forces in Scotland agreed to help, that was the first yes, and that was a big door. Right. And it was in conjunction with the special forces in Scotland that he wrote that letter to Neil Armstrong. Let's not forget, Neil has Scottish heritage in his family.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Ian and Armstrong, yeah, the Armstrongs are kind of, they were the gatekeepers in the border between Scotland and England.
So was this a clan thing then? I mean, is this a Scottish thing? You just call up another clan and they
no idea. I know people ask me this. I mean, the letter was very simply, we are doing this expedition. We're going into this amazing place, and we have the Scottish connection as well.
Right.
Father's mom's name was Armstrong. She was an Armstrong, and so I think it was just a very simple, straightforward invitation. And Neil wrote back to say that it would be an honor to take part in this endeavor.
That's fantastic. It's just a bunch of synchronous events that just had to click into place that just seemed to be intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. By that point, my father had built a crazy strong amount of intention. And also symbolically, I mean, if you believe in being guided by something beyond yourself.
I do.
I love the symbology of the first man on the moon, having gone into space, but then creating this complete axis. So then he goes right into the deepest part of Earth. He goes into the Earth.
That was not lost on me either. I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And aren't we now very aware that, trying to escape this planet is, we're really questioning all of this kind of space age stuff.
It also brings above to below in a very interesting way, I thought.
Right? Yeah, I think it was such a symbolic act of his. And he compared being in this cave to being in the moon. It's also this otherworldly environment. But, it's becoming very obvious to me that like wherever he pointed was just and Neil was a very, again, intentional man, right? He didn't just do whatever.
Right.
Anything he did with a lot of power.
Right.
And so I think just both of them before leaving, they were like pointing at South America and pointing into the ground. And now we know, now there's this amazing resurgence of interest in soil, mushrooms, mycelium. Our bodies are becoming at the front line, and then the earth is our larger body. So that extension, so the earth is an extension to our bodies and the soil that we're all part of. And so I really feel that, again, the cave symbolizes a lot of this stuff.
There's a lot of symbology in this. I mean, I'm just blown away. It's a fascinating story. I wasn't even remotely aware that any of this had occurred until last week when I started doing research for this interview. And I said, oh, my God, I have a million questions. But I want to get down to your art because it's really important for me to do so. Before we do that, I understand your father wrote a book called Taos Gold, The Archives of Atlantis. I haven't had an opportunity to read the book. Why the Archives of Atlantis? What is that to do with the Sumerian writings that you know of?
So, so many people are researching Atlantis, right? You find that everyone's pointing to Atlantis in different parts all over the world. My father, through the study of the older languages in the Americas, came to the conclusion that for him, it's the Old Andes. So if you split Atlantis, it's Atoll, which means old, and Antes, which is Andes. So that was his resolution. And because he really did believe that civilization, like as we know, it could have come from South, he believed it was so old. It's one of the founding centers of our species, actually. So he believed that that's where Atlantis was based, where a lot of the other mythologies that are surrounding the Americas could lead to, and possibly this metal library could be from that time.
I see. So this region of Ecuador is inhabited by a nation of people called the Ivaro. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Have you come to know these people and in your travels there?
Yes. So the Jibaro or the Shuar people are one of the tribes that live within the Amazon of Ecuador, right. And they are the guardians of this particular cave. And they're also the ones that in the story. So my father ended up meeting someone that claims to have really discovered this treasure. He said it was the Shuar that gave him information on that. And so, yes, they're the ones that guard the cave. I became friends with the family. So it's just actually, there's about just 10 of them that are next to the Tayos caves that I visit. Right. And then there's a larger community just next door to that. I think there's about 80,000 Shuar in Ecuador, and they kind of line a whole bunch of the Amazon. So yeah, we've been working closely with them for a number of years, as they're usually our guides. They host us, and we're also going to be including them in any plans that we make in the future. And for me, the most fascinating thing is really their cosmology.
Yeah, what do you know about their cosmology? It's my understanding they look at human consciousness as existing on 3 levels, which is something I understand as well. But what do you know about their cosmology? I'm fascinated with that.
So one of the main things is that they don't, they have the spirit and dream world that they speak to, and they don't see the spirit or dream world as separate from this physical reality. That's kind of and that's the best way to describe it with Western terms, is that it's all in one for them. Everything comes from the dream world or the spirit world. So they have a number of rituals and ways in which they connect to this other world, including through plant wisdom. Right. And I think the 3 layers of consciousness I'm trying to remember is probably to do with the underworld, the middle world, and the upper world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So also they with the way in which they travel is, again, through their work. And again, these are kind of Western words for this, but through the mind or through spiritual journeys, they will enter the underworld, the middle world, or the upper world to gather information to then support the tribe in its health, in its flourishing, in its future.
Right.
And they have this intrinsic connection, very comprehensive connection to their environment and nature. So what I really love about them is that they have songs to speak to the land. So they will sing to the river to ask permission to fish. They'll sing to the jungle to ask permission to hunt or to chop down trees. They'll sing to their food as it's growing, as they're cooking it. They'll ask permission to the cave before entering. And they have spirits. They have different spirits for each part of the ecosystem. So there'll be a name for the spirit of the river, a name for the spirit of the sun, etc. One of my favorites is Nungui, who's the female spirit or female goddess / spirit that sings to the jungle at night to keep its health. And so they have a whole kind of, like I said, comprehensive way of that connection to nature. And they're also some of the fiercest warriors of history. The Spanish couldn't conquer them. Like the Spaniards, the conquistadors that came over, ran away. They tried to defeat the Shuar, and they weren't able to. So they were left alone for hundreds of years in the Amazon. They used to shrink heads of their enemies. If you've ever seen shrunken heads, that's a Shuar. Yeah. They don't do that anymore. They've actually, they're warriors, but they're not doing that anymore. Back in the day, you had to be this amazing warrior that was initiated. They had these really intense initiation rituals of like being sent into the jungle for days without food and water so that you can access the spirit of Arutam. Arutam is their spirit, their main spirit that gives them strength and gives them health and protects them as they live in these the jungle is not an easy environment to live in. But
Right.
they rely on these spirits to help them survive. And these are spirits of nature, they're spirits of the dream world.
Mm-hmm.
They also use dreams as prophecy or dreams as diagnosis of illness. They'll have their local medicine man that knows how to do this, but the tribe themselves also know how to work with plants. They do use plant medicines like ayahuasca and datura to go to these other worlds and bring back information.
Mm-hmm.
But what is, again, very inspiring to me is that it's all done for practical purposes. So there's no part of their cosmology that isn't about like keeping the tribe and community healthy, about finding water sources or knowing where to hunt and how to do it in a way that doesn't take the ecosystem out of balance.
Right.
And for that reason, they used to be more nomadic because you would hunt in an area and then move on, so it had time to replenish it.
Right.
And yeah.
And so, like a lot of other indigenous cultures who were exposed to Western explorers, they eventually adopted Catholicism and integrated into their previous religious cosmologies. That's my understanding of where they are today. And there's no need for them. I guess they're not feeling threatened in any way, so there's no need to become fierce warriors again.
Yeah, exactly. There's no, and I hear that the younger generations aren't interested in that as well. You're talking about some harsh training to be able to get to that level.
Amen.
And so, yeah, they're bringing in more modern culture, more the modern clothing and TVs, for example, now. And that also seems to be one of the biggest threats, is really actually them ingesting culture that they're not used to. And so it causes all sorts of different issues.
Right, right. It sounds to me, I've never been down to that region, it sounds like they have a very integral approach to life and spirituality. Here in the Western consciousness lexicon, we'd use words to describe the same ideas like subconscious, superconscious, and consciousness is awareness, to reflect these ideas of an underworld, a overworld, a spiritual world, and integrating that into our present world. So it's a very old idea, and it's actually, it seems to be a very common notion between cultures and indigenous cultures in North and South America.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of similarities and connections. I mean, if you study a lot of tribes, also in Mexico, there's a lot of that as well, yeah.
Right. And I imagine they're using a lot of plant-based medicines, hallucinogens as part of their spiritual seeking and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So they'll use a combination. One of the main ones is ayahuasca, but they've got datura as well, and some other teas, tobacco. They actually have an array of plants that they can use to cleanse the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, everything that's in modern or Western medicine today originates in the Amazon, pretty much, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I do remember calling them over COVID, and I said, how are you all doing? They were like, yeah, some of us got it, and we just drank a tea.
Right, pine needles, and I mean, God knows.
Yeah, we just went out the backyard and figured it out. And again, when you're that strong, when you're that resilient, your immune system's already just like used to fighting. I mean, kind of repelling so much in your environment that it continues to amaze me. Yeah.
Yeah, and yet we know that a lot of those nations or tribes at the time were definitely exposed to diseases that they could not have an immunity to because there was an ocean that separated them from the pox. So the understanding of the balance of nature is always something that I've been fascinated with and really take a lot of wisdom from indigenous cultures. And I hope one day we being, descendants of European cultures, have more of a dominion type of ideology, where rather than being a part of the earth and the earth's consciousness, we've been told we should dominate it. Fascinating field for study, and I imagine that it does inform your artwork. So let's shift the conversation to your artwork. Does this experience of yours inform your artwork?
Yes, absolutely. Everything began when he died. That year is what marks my afterlife. The moment I just kind of had my own awakening, and I feed all of that into my work.
So that began a big journey for you. First of all, my condolences on the loss of your dad so young. That is a big loss. Your father passed away in 2008, and I saw this on your website in your bio. It says, you entered into the inner quest of the depths of my psyche and consciousness. This developed into an obsession with any field that seeks to understand dimensions of the mind and primal intelligence that courses through us and directs our evolution. For 13 years, I've studied the fields of meditation, mindfulness, shamanic, and energy medicine practices, psychedelics, plant medicines, neuroscience, and psychology. This research is embodied in all my work and continues to inform it to this day. So let's go down the rabbit hole of your work. Okay, you're a multidisciplined artist. You strive to create immersive environments to help people have a deeper experience of their inner world. My understanding is that we share a love of psychology, the exploration of altered states of consciousness, and both of us have an understanding of the effects of this work as it plays a healing role in our psyche. I'm first interested to know, what branch of psychology are you most fond of?
Well, so I'm a generalist with that. I tend to go down more the Carl Jung school, but
You and me both.
I actually am very interested in mindfulness-based techniques and how they're being incorporated into therapy modalities. There's just now so many, to be honest. Like with psychology, I tend to kind of like dip in and out and not. I ended up getting kind of more interested in the psychedelic piece. But yeah, I would say just the Carl Jung school, I tend to gravitate more towards people that have gone through the Carl Jung school.
Are you a fan of the Red Book?
Yes.
You and me both. Yeah. I've read it 3, maybe 4 times now.
Wow.
And you? I mean, the artwork in there is stunning, isn't it? And the
It's
color
amazing.
plates, right?
Absolutely. His work has helped me a lot with my own dream practice.
Right.
I've been a strong dreamer since I was a little girl. And actually a lot of it was, I've had a lot of nightmares since I was little. And so a lot of his understandings have also helped me integrate, I suppose, the shadow aspects of my dream world.
Well, that is the whole point of doing any psychological work, in my opinion, is integration. You got to dig and then do your own cave exploration, come out with some gold. That's really what it's all about. Transmute everything in shadow into gold, to put it in alchemical terms. How do you incorporate psychology in your artwork?
Well, so I mean, it really just comes from the processing of my emotional states and my dreams, and how that helps me, like you say, transmute things in my life, and kind of integrate these stories so that they help me in different ways. I got very interested in mindfulness practices a long time ago in meditation, and so I would say it's mostly from my dreams that I try and create these dreamscapes and liminal spaces where so much insight has come through for me, that I then use psychological language to understand. But for me, between the psychological language and the artistical visual language is where I find the sweet spot of something that feels more integrated for me.
So at least in your visual work, because I know you work in a couple of different mediums, would you say it's a reflective of your personal subconscious in many respects, superconscious visions? What do you make of what you're doing?
So at the beginning, I used to paint my shamanic journeys. I started seeing a shamanic practitioner to clear my grief from my dad's death. And I started having these strong visions. So I started painting those at the beginning. So they were kind of me-centered and focused.
Right.
Then as I went along and I mentioned psychedelics, I then started doing plant medicine journeys and psychedelic journeys to go a bit deeper. And that at some point they stopped showing me personal stuff and just started turning me into water or mist or elements. I then became so elemental. So then my ceremonial work and all of this kind of inner work became about elements of nature and music. And so that's my latest work, which you'll see on the website, which is these watercolors are to represent this idea of water as consciousness. Because by then I've been dreaming of water my whole life. I've kind of been noticing how my dreams changed with my emotional state. My water dreams changed with my emotional state. And I decided to adopt it as this metaphor for consciousness in its shape-shifting qualities.
Right.
And so part of me using watercolors was really that. And secondly, I wanted to give it the sense of lightness and grace or beauty. And so I wanted to make these works help people open up with the way they brought you into this liminal space or this elemental space. And they're quite dreamy looking things. For me, like I said, dreams have been so significant throughout my whole life that I wanted to be able to express that.
Right, right. Well, that's what a true artist does, isn't it? That's the whole point. So I went to your website. You do beautiful work. The series you're talking about that's on that site, is it the Emergence of the Afterlife series?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. The forms are just really beautiful. They're flowing, ethereal, very water-like. You have colors and textures that are gorgeous, really nice depth of field, very subtle and gradual emergence of something out of nothing. When you're painting, are you painting in altered states or what you see in altered states, or are these conceptual ideas that you're working with?
So mostly I'm painting from a meditative state. I don't really alter my consciousness that much.
One doesn't have to, right?
Yeah, it's like you get to the point where you've integrated so much of this work that life feels
Right.
like a quite an altering experience. Like I would say, like life is very psychedelic in and of itself. So,
Right.
but what I do is I set up a sacred space for it, and I play some music that gets my mind to quieten down, so I can really feel sensations. I paint from my body
Right.
and from a place of feeling something beyond me. And so because of my meditation practice, I'm able to enter a deeper state of alpha and theta, which I actually just had measured this week, which is great. So I only paint when I feel that energy of being able to channel come through, and music is the most conducive thing for me. So I'd say I use music to get my mind on board.
So painting is a very somatic experience for you, very kinesthetic. You're channeling an energy, would you
Yeah,
say?
I really can say this now. At the beginning, I had all these concepts. I was like, okay, I want to make the water look like consciousness and consciousness look like water. And like you said, really create this emergent quality. I think that's like really, really the most fascinating thing about consciousness. It's like fluid, and then it
Yes.
solidifies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent ages trying to make that work,
Mm-hmm.
and then ages trying to make it look like water, but something beyond water.
Right.
And after a while, I noticed that some of my favorite works were just like moments where something would just click, and it would
Mm-hmm.
just like solidify, and I would have to just step back and be like, I was like, wow, there's something really emerging here. Even for me, I was very technical at first, and then I
Right.
noticed that as long as I created this kind of like very serene space of sanctuary and wanting to express the beauty of consciousness, things just started unfolding. And as I was saying to Robert the other day, I then noticed I was painting music. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I'm actually painting music as well as nature.
Yeah, you're dropping a name there, and I want to bring presence to it. We're talking about the producer of the program here, one of the producers of the program, Robert Neville. So we have to give him a little shout out while we're at it. You also dropped another name, and made my ears perk up. You were talking about they as a source of information. You're talking about something that's informing your work, is the sense that I get. And then you proceeded to talk about the elementals. Are you in connection with the elementals as you're trying to paint? Who are they? Do they actually have a personality that you are tapping into?
Wow, yeah, I've never been asked this before, and
I'm going to ask you all kinds of questions you've
yeah, yeah,
probably
yeah,
never been asked before. I love art. Go
great.
ahead.
Yeah, so I did some basic shamanic training 10 years ago or something, and I
Hmm.
spent a whole year talking to nature. So the main thing that we did was go out to nature sober
Hmm.
and just ask the wind for wisdom. We asked the earth, we asked all the elements to
Hmm.
let us know what we needed to see, hear, or feel.
Right.
And so that got really embedded in me. And by the time, again, I came to paint, I noticed that like anytime I wanted to express water, it just kept giving me more ideas.
Are you a water sign?
I'm fire, so I'm a Leo, so I'm fire.
Okay, so you're looking to balance then.
Yeah, but I
I'm
also
sorry, I'm playing with you.
no, but I know. I don't know. I get interested in astrology now, but apparently my sun sign's in the 11th house of Aquarius.
Right.
So maybe I don't know. I don't know enough about these things, but yes, I got again very interested in water because I've had water dreams since I was born. You know, it's been the main element in my life, and I noticed at one point that every time I would speak to these elements, they would talk back. And so it took me a few years to really believe in this. At
Mhm.
first, I was like, oh, it's my imagination. You know, I do come from a shamanic country, but it took a while for my kind of westernized mind to, uncover this stuff.
Sure.
And so I very much say to people nowadays that I believe every element has some sort of sentience, some sort of consciousness you can speak to, and you can form a relationship over time with it. I feel personally that my works are the culmination of this lifelong relationship to these elements.
My understanding of art, I'm a musician. You see all the guitars behind you. My wife, on the other hand, is an encaustic artist who also sculpts, and she started off her training as a sculptor. Very rigid, very exact calipers out, measurements, perspective, all of that, right? She started pouring wax and her life became very abstract. She became fascinated with this. Again, with the idea of something emerging ex nihilo, something out of nothing. And, the wax is so uncontrollable. It's not like, a brush where you have a modicum of control. Once you start pouring, it's going to do its thing. So you have to kind of interact with it in a unique way. And she describes her working process as being in an altered state of consciousness, but only mildly. You have to stay pretty present with big hot pots of wax, So I'm interested in your process and helping the audience understand your process as an artist and the state of consciousness you're in. Do you think, first of all, that you're painting mostly from a perspective of a collective consciousness or a personal consciousness? And do you need for me to define those two in order for you to answer the question correctly? You're nodding, so I assume you know what I'm talking about.
I do. I find the same. I have to, I don't alter my consciousness that much when I paint because I still have to be present to what the element itself wants to do.
Right. You can't go wandering off in the aethers now, can you? Completely.
Yeah, you can.
Right.
And I really pay attention to where it wants to flow and go. Like where my heart feels pulled to colors, I follow that. And then
Right.
when I watch them kind of, swim around the page, I just listen like I would with water. When I'm listening to water in nature, it's just the same thing. It's just on a smaller scale.
Listening.
Listening.
You're incorporating your sense of hearing. And so you're obviously not hearing the painting talking to you in a way that another person could subjectively experience that.
Yeah.
You're in some form of altered state, connecting with something that's emerging out of nothing that seems to have a fluidic aspect to it. I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm interviewing you. I don't want to hear me diagnose your work.
Good.
I'm trying to get a sense of where you're feeling, but I'm noticing that your sense, even though you're a visual artist, at least in this respect, your primary sense is not your visual cortex. It's your auditory cortex. Am I hearing that correctly?
I would say, let me feel into this. I would say,
now you're getting kinesthetic on me. You're looking for the feeling, right?
yeah. I feel, and then I would say, I feel my body. And then sometimes I just get this image and then I hear something. It's a number of things. It's a whole thing of like
multisensory.
When I'm relaxed, I make sure I'm relaxed. And I usually ask, what color?
Right.
Usually I start with which color, what am I representing? It's because I have a few concepts I want to put forth. So I usually choose the concept first. I'm like, okay, this is the concept I'm going to paint. And then I ask my consciousness for colors, and then I ask them for a composition, but I never get the full thing because then I have to leave a bunch of space for surprise to happen, for the element to meet me halfway,
Right.
And that's why creating, getting the hang of a liminal space is like, how do you soften your consciousness enough to allow for someone else's consciousness to enter the space? In this case, to me, it's the element of water, and maybe the subconscious, maybe this this kind of primal soup of creation that just wants to speak through the work.
Could you imagine what would happen to our species if we all allowed each other a little space for that type of interaction, treating each other in that same way?
Oh God, yeah. And well, I mean, I've been learning from Mr. Joe here, another name drop, but the grand Joe, about, life being about relationships. And that's something I am just really kind of into massively at the moment, both with the human world, but also with the more than human world. So I do feel that my art is also here to give a voice to the elemental intelligence that exists in nature. So it's not always just human centric.
Right.
I have to say, like, I would say my work is actually it's really about that meeting of human and non-human, because I used to paint a lot about myself or write about myself. Like I said, there was a point when self just left, and I don't even know how to explain that. I don't see myself as that self anymore. I see myself as the cell within this larger ecology, and I see myself as this deep list. Like, since I was a little girl, I wanted nature to be able to speak. And so, like, I see that my work is all about giving a human voice as opposed to those places that want to speak to us and share their wisdom with us. I'm still amazed at how much good advice I get from the elements.
You're jamming with the elements as a musician. The art of jamming for people who do not know this.
I mean, I'll just mention one last thing. It's because it's a big concept that I am going to start painting about, that's come through in the last year, is this idea that, like, I'm an instrument, I'm a musical instrument, and these life forces, these elements are playing me as an instrument. So yes. I really love the idea that life wants to make music with me, and it wants to do so through various means and materials and textures and sensory experiences. That's and exactly. So I like, the main thing I open up nowadays is I say to life, how do you want to play my music today?
Do you approach the rest of your day outside of your world of art in that same way?
Yes, absolutely.
Relationships with all things tends to take on a more artistic bent, doesn't it? You realize how to interact with things differently when you explore this work. Well done. So in addition to being a visual artist, and, I can't praise your work enough. I've been to your website. I love what you're doing. I encourage everybody to go there and visit, and we will give them contact information in just a minute. In addition to being a visual artist, you're working with composer John Hopkins on a record that you call Music for Psychedelic Therapy, and it involves something called the numinous sonofield. Explain to the world what it is you're doing with music.
Okay, so I'll unpack a few of those things.
Please do.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, before I move on from the art, well, actually, this is kind of a bridge. I wanted to mention the luminous sentience concept that is a major part of my art, where everything I do. And I used that name to name that space where human consciousness meets the consciousness of nature or the elements, luminous sentience. So there's this luminosity when you soften into that space between, and sentience is really to refer to something that has a way of sensing and feeling that you can communicate with. Mm-hmm. So moving on from that, we have this concept of numinous sonofield, and that was born again in the last year and a half, when I noticed that I was painting music, and that music to me is like water, just like consciousness. Music is like water, and started seeing it like this liquid architecture. Mm-hmm. And so the amount of insights, both in ceremonial spaces and outside them, that I've had under the swimming in the sea of music, I wanted to, again, give it a name so that I could strengthen this concept. And so the numinous sonofield was born from that. Mm-hmm. And numinous refers to divine or insight, and sonofield, the sea of sound.
Right.
And so I would say that all of my work is now culminating around that one concept, the numinous sonofield. So my paintings are becoming even more watery, and I'm adding all the musical layers to that as well. So I ended up, so my art ended up on the cover of John Hopkins' Music for Psychedelic Therapy, which was released last year. And John is a world-renowned electronic composer of both electronic techno, but also ambient works. And he accepted an invitation to come to the Tayos Caves in Ecuador with me and also my creative partner, Tamsin, back in 2018. We invited him and a group of other musicians and a neuroscientist to come and map the cave from an artist perspective to then create this composition that he made, which is part of the album. And it's a 20-minute long piece, which includes recordings from the cave. Now, what happened, so it took him 2 years to create this piece, but then what happened is he ended up being inspired from that piece to create this larger album. So now we have an hour-long composition, which is designed to support people. It's called Music for Psychedelic Therapy if they want to use it for a psychedelic experience. But I also think it's really a brilliant piece that has translated the spirit of the cave into this musical journey and created an emotional bridge for people in that sense. So John very kindly donated his time to do this and to help us tell the story of the cave and bring music into the picture.
Well, I had the pleasure of listening to it. I've been making that type of music and these types of recordings for a very long time, and I have to say that you guys did an artful job with this. There's a lot of space in there. The ambient recordings are not overused. They are beautifully transitional. They speak to you as an instrument within the piece. They are well integrated is the best way that I can say that. The music itself is spacious, open. It's not intrusive in any way. It creates a nice environment.
We just tested it on the group yesterday as well, while they were getting their brainwaves measured, and there was a massive positive response, and people had some really incredible far-out experiences. And John really is at the height of his career, and he's a master of his craft. He's been making music since he was very young, and we were so grateful and happy that he could come to this cave on this arduous journey. It's not easy to get there, and create this amazing composition with the recordings.
Are you doing tours of that cave as well, and expeditions?
I've designed an expedition that I'm going to make available for people. I wouldn't go with people. It's not something I want to be doing all the time. But now I'm working with a travel agency to make that available to the general public. So I'm excited to launch that later, I think this year. And then my next expedition that I'll lead will be with a few guardians of the project. So people that have sponsored the project get to come with me. And also we are talking to National Geographic about doing a piece. We've got an amazing cave photographer, one of the top cave photographers in the world is interested in coming. We're pitching a documentary, and we will have hopefully an amazing female musician accompanying us next time. And before I forget, people are always like, what are you doing with the treasure? What's going on? Why are you still going back to a cave that has no treasure?
Sounds like it has a lot of treasure. It's just of a different nature.
Well, exactly. So when I started exploring these jungles and caves, I completely fell in love with nature. Nature helped me heal so much grief I was going through. And because I started to be able to talk to it, I was just completely bowled over by that space, that luminous sentience. I was just like, what is this? How did nobody tell me that nature's so intelligent and it can speak to me? So for me, the chambers in the cave are like cathedral spaces, and they have this beautiful resonance. And it's why, like, when I went there with the film crew, I listened to the resonance, and I said to Tamsin, I need to take a musician there. And that's how the thing was born. And so, yes, I very much believe nature's the treasure, the cave's the treasure, these jungles are the treasure, the shuar are the treasure. and we need to do everything we can to protect them. But on the other side of that, we do have we are partnering up with a couple of universities in Ecuador who are, doing the research, the on the ground research, and mapping more caves and discovering all sorts of interesting things, which we will be able to share with audiences in the future. But this is all very young and very pioneering work, and so I had to really kind of get others to help instead of trying to, explore in jungles and caves is really hard and not easy to do. And so for me, it made a lot of sense to get more scientists and researchers involved and kind of, just make it this larger collective endeavor.
Well, I think it's an amazing project you're involved in there. I love the fact that you're so passionate about it, and I truly, truly hope that you get all the support that you need. I'd join you, but I'm ancient. There's no way I'm going down into the mouth of a cave. What is that, like a 300-foot drop or something, the entrance?
Yeah, to enter this cave, you have to go into 200-foot drop in.
With 2-pound spiders and scorpions living on the walls and snake. I'm more of a 4-star, I'm going to hang out at the mall because leave me alone type of guy when I go on vacation.
It's definitely a trip, and it's an initiation for anyone that goes because all your human fears come up. It's actually, physically difficult, technically difficult, and it's even, it's an 8-hour drive from, the city to then go down the river to then hike into the jungle. There's no roads that go there and there's no signals. So you're in the middle of the wildness of that.
Well, I've done my time in shamanic journeys and psychological probings, and I'm not afraid, but I am way too tired to be doing any of that. I evoke senior citizen privilege. So you're currently at the Monroe Institute campus, and you're doing the residential program for exploring the relationship of altered states and arts called Creation Station. Do I have that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I'm curious to know how the program went and what the personal results were for you.
So I was really happy to get this invitation. And for me, it was really such a beautiful chance to be in a place where there's consciousness work, where we could deepen that again. I didn't know much about the Monroe Institute and the Sound Science Department. So to be able to be immersed in that was a real gift. And then to be around other creatives and musicians, especially, who I could bounce ideas off of, supporting each other along this journey and really transmute anything that we needed to. I actually ended up clearing some gunky emotional stuff that I was carrying like the first few days I got here, because between the lushness that's surrounding us, the sunshine, and also the lake, I was able to kind of open up and be really supported in that space. And I brought some paintings to do. I would say the biggest gift really was learning about the sound science and the consciousness work that you do here.
It's sacred ground to me. I haven't been back in, I don't know, at least 15 years now. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia now, but my footprints are all over that ground there. For 13 years I was there. Your work is amazing. I hope that the work that you did this week will uncover and remove any blockages you don't seem to currently have, but actually inspire even a greater series. I really love what you're doing. I think you're a visionary. I can't compliment your work enough, and I think that people who would like to get in touch with you about all that you're doing, whether it be the saving of the Tayos or the paintings that you're making, how can they get in touch with you? How do they get to buy your work or work with you?
Great. So I have my personal website, which is eileen-hall.com, and there you'll be able to see my range of work and paintings, and people can purchase prints of any one of those works. And there's a link for that on the website. And there's actually a lot of the originals are up for sale as well. And then you can follow me on Instagram at Hall_Eileen. And personally, and you can sign up to my newsletter to get more info from me about my art and my work and my news. and some special events I'm going to be designing alongside to do with this numinous sonar field concept. And then secondly, it's Tayos, TAYOS.org to follow the cave story. Again, you can sign up to the newsletter and get updates on everything that we're doing. The project's a little bit quiet at the moment just because we're doing a whole bunch of fundraising. So we've actually created this liminal compass journey online for people that want to support our work. So you can, give us a bit, whatever donation you choose, and you can access more art and writings and photographs of the expeditions we've been on, musings on this connection to nature. And then there's different tiers of membership there for people that then are also interested in coming to the cave with us. So those are the two channels that you can follow us on. And we, especially with Tayos, we'll have lots more updates near the end of the year. And in the meantime, this whole concept of the numinous sonar field for me personally is starting to kick up a notch. And the collaboration with Monroe is going to really bring some interesting things to light as well. And before I forget to mention, we are fundraising. So if anybody is interested, we are getting more people that are very aware of the problems of the Amazon and these countries in trying to protect their ecosystem. So if anybody would like to make any size of donation, we'd welcome it at the moment as we're getting this set up. And lastly, but not least, we're going to be designing an art installation, an immersive art experience with Marshmallow Laser Feast and John's Piece that will be touring different cities in the next, we're hoping to make that in the next couple of years. So again, sign up to get details on how you can attend this cave journey that we're going to be creating for people through the musical space.
Well, again, I love what you're doing. I'm really happy that we had this conversation. It brings a unique perspective to the conversation of what is consciousness. I'll leave you to answer this one question I ask all my guests. From your perspective, what is consciousness?
For me, consciousness really is the origin of everything. I call it the primal soup of creation. Everything comes from thought or feeling first before it's created in any reality. And so, for me, it's really this powerful substance that we can use in so many different ways. And it's why looking at our ethics and our intentions is really, really matters. And how we use this fuel is to me, one of the biggest questions in the next stage of our evolution as a species. Is like how we're evolving is going to be led by the consciousness with which we do that.
Mm-hmm. Eileen Hall, you're pure gold. Thanks for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Mark.
Be certain to tune in again to Expanding on Consciousness to become informed on the fascinating field of consciousness studies and its applications. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the guests and the host. They do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Monroe Institute. Expanding on Consciousness is underwritten and produced by the Monroe Institute, copyright 2022, and is broadcast by permission. Reproduction or redistribution without the express written consent of Monroe Institute is prohibited by law. For more information about Expanding on Consciousness, visit our website at monroeinstitute.org or connect with us on the socials. Thank you for listening.